We've created a way to handle our strength and our health, but now we need a way to handle our intelligence slash mana and dexterity slash stamina. And I think the best way to do that is in a thing called a game loop. So every game has a game loop, and it's something that runs at a very fast speed to handle everything that's going on in the game, everything to do with the player. And there are other ways to do this, but I find that this is the best way to handle it because mana and stamina are something that's going to be something that's constantly tracked and moving up and down, as well as other things that come down the line in our game, which we can throw into this game loop. So what we're going to do to create a game loop is a new script container called a world script container.
So a game loop is just something that runs every so often, and pretty much every game has a game loop, at least traditionally. So we have to set a timer for that, and let's do that. I'm going to create a new document here in VS Code to do our game loop. Let's just save it and call it a game loop. I'll save it in our scripts folder, .dsc, and it'll be in our plugins folder, in our Denizen folder, and then in our scripts folder. And I want to introduce you to a new script container, and that is a world script. And those are another often used script. So let's go look at the documentation for that. We'll look at language explanations. We'll search for world script container. Here it is. And here's the layout for it. This one's a pretty simple one, although it can get very complex to what it does with these events. But you can see that instead of script, like a lot of other script containers have, this one has an events. So let's write this out. It needs a name and the type world and events. So the name will be game loop. We can give it whatever name we want, and then a colon, and then 4 spaces, and the type will be world. This is conventional for every script container. World. And then events. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what events are we going to use? And we have to learn what events are. So there, we went over commands, we went over tags, we went over mechanisms a little bit. We will go over all these more. But events is another item that we have to talk about. And here's a list of them. Again, we have our jump links for different categories. But you can scroll through these at your leisure to see different things and read them tonight and see all kinds of different things you can do. The one we are going to do, so we have to do a kind of a timed event. So an event is when something happens in the game, then it triggers it. Here's when a block cooks. And it's helpful if you know Minecraft because then you can find the things that happen in the game if you already know it. I came into this just wanting to make a game and not knowing Minecraft, so I'm kind of backfilling knowledge with Minecraft. I imagine most people playing Minecraft know about it. My goal is to kind of just get role player gamers to play this game and not have it have much to do with Minecraft, except for its wonderful vanilla mechanics that we'll keep in the game. But anyway, so these are different things that happen in the game, like when player jumps, when a block is broken, when the time changes, all kinds of stuff. There's really so many, and they're very helpful because, like I said, you have to have the game do a mechanic when the player does something or something happens in the game. Some sort of input happens, whether it's them doing a command or them interacting with an NPC or an event happening in the game. So let's look at these. The one that I really want to use, I already know what it is. It's on delta time. So let's search for that delta time. All right, this is the one we're going to use. So this is something that happens every hour if you specify hourly, every minute or every second. We're going to do every second because the game loop has to run often enough that it catches what you want it to do. If you do it too long, then it's not going to see the event happening unless it's running on that second or minute that you're running it on. So we need to run it pretty fast anyway. So secondly is what we'll use. All right, so this is the one. Feel free to read more. The other thing about events that I wanted to touch on here is that when an event is run, it gives you a context, and that's what the developers call this thing here. So what it gives you is if you use this inside of your script, it will give you the second. Now there's much more useful context in this, as we'll see, and I use them all the time for things. Like when a player clicks in an inventory, it'll give you the slot they clicked on and the item they clicked with and the item they clicked on. So it's very, very useful. This one we may not use, but I wanted to point it out just so you're familiar with it a little bit when we go into more events down the road. All right, let's write this out. So we put it under events, and we're going to write on delta time, just like it's said in the documentation. Secondly, and you have to have a colon. So that's going to run every second right now, and we can announce you know something to show that it's working. This is something that it's going to run every second, so it's going to be very fast. But so it'll spam our screen basically. And the reason I have to use announce instead of narrate, because I could use a narrate. However, I would have to give it a target to tell who to narrate to, because this event it's not tied to a player. It's not saying when a player does something. It's not saying when a player breaks a block or steps on a block or anything like that. It's just saying when the time changes. So it doesn't really have a target to narrate to unless we specify one, and we'd have to write a little tag to do that, which I'll show you at some point. But we can use announce. I wanted to show you a different command, announce, which just announces it to everybody on the server. All right, to make sure that one of these is indented, and then we will go over and reload, X reload, and it should start ticking every second, which is nice. So we have something. So if you need something that happens every second, that is how you do that. All right, so now we need to do it more than once a second. So let's go in here, and we're going to set up a variable for definition for how many times per second. So let's just set it up per second, and we're going to run it 5 times per second. So with Minecraft, there's 20 ticks per second, so something can have 20 times per second. We only need to do it a fifth of that. So what would that be? 4 times a second, I think. My math skills aren't always that great. I am an artist by trade, so I'm trying to backfill my information with math as I go. But anyway, so every 5 times per second. So we're setting up a definition. That way, if we need to increase it, we can right here. We already know it's working, so we're going to take this announce away, and then we're going to define a wait time. And that's going to be an element. So we talked about elements, how you can just set up an element. If you need to do a division on 1 like this, like an inverse kind of thing, I call it inverse, 1 over something, you can do an element, and then you can put in your definition per second here. So we're breaking things down in definitions, as you know how I like to do it. And we're creating a blank element because we need to give it 1. You can't just divide by 1 on its own. You have to wrap it as an element. And we're using a div tag here. So there's different operators you can do for math, and div is one, which is for divide. This load and .div, and this is for location tag. This is for an element tag. So you divide by a number, and this is a decimal in this case, and you can specify an integer if you want to. And there's multiply. I'll just click over a couple more since we're in here. Multiply is the same idea. You're multiplying, you can add. Chunk tag, cuboid tag, duration tag. You can add to ellipsoid tag, location tag. There's a lot of adds. Not address. Adding to the time. Element, here we go. So this is just adding 2 numbers together. And then of course there's sup for. Let's just go to element tag.add. So we're going to scroll down to see round, and it's sub right here. So subtract. So those we'll use a lot, and other things as well. There's modulus and things like that. So this is going to make a wait time per second, and then we'll use this soon. And now we need to do whatever's happening in this loop, or this event to happen to every player. So we're going to do a for each loop for that. We talked about for each loop, but you can loop through all the players on the server. And the way to do that is with server.list online players and as, like we do with the for each loop if you go back to the documentation and look at the previous episodes. And then I'm just going to give it a thing to iterate over called player. You can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it player. I usually try to tie it on into what the item is going to be that we'll be working on in here. So we're starting with a tag called server. That's a common one you'll do. Server and player are two very common tags to start with. And then list online players, list. That's one I just happen to know. You know, you might start out thinking, well, I need to do this to all the players. Let me see here. Let's fly and find it. And this is kind of a good way to see all kinds of other things that there are regarding players. All right. Offline players, online players. There we go. It's just online players. I think it has updated since the last time I looked at it. That's why it's good to kind of always go back through and refactor your code. So it's server.online players. So you can see that it's in the server category. And if we go back to the top of this category, you'll see all the server things, which we've kind of been looking at here in the last few seconds. That's alphabetical within those categories. So you see the category server. So here's all the things that the tags you can run on servers, on the server. So this is basically saying server, find all the online players, and then for each one, we're going to do something. So right now there's not any online players, but we can announce, test this out incrementally, announce player. And this player is the definition player that we just made, the one that we just created right here. This is that object right now, not the typical player tag that you see that I use a lot. All right, if we go back to the game, this is going to spam my own self, if I spelled it right. And there's my UUID. A quick note if you wanted to do something like .name, we'll do that a lot. It's taking the tag and it's using the tag name on it. So that's often a thing you can do with player, and you can do with materials and objects. So if you have the material color, you can get its name, which is color, and all that kind of stuff. So this will be a little bit more, just more friendly to read. There we go, my name. Of course, we're not just going to announce that. So here's where we're going to put our logic in of all the stuff we want to do for the game loop. So you can see we have our game loop running. It's running. We made it. But all it's doing is announcing every player online. So if there were multiple players, it would be naming all of them right now. All right, so what do we want to do? Let's see. So we only want to run this so many times per second. And so we're going to put a wait. This is another command. A wait. Per second, I guess. Wait. So what you do with a wait, if you look at the command, if we look at the command in our documentation, go to commands, look up wait. It's something you'll do a lot when you need to wait, to make the server wait for something, make the queue wait for something, the task or whatever you're working on, the script. So you can use 1M for 1 minute, 1S for 1 second, 1 hour, that kind of thing. And there's some little more information here to look deeper into it. So we could put like wait we're waiting 5 seconds. But what we're going to do is wait. We already created a variable for the amount of time that we're waiting, so we're going to put that in here. And we're going to call that wait time. So that's just a different way to take my number and break it out to things that I want to do, Alright, so now we want to make a task that we're going to run in here. So we're not going to announce this, we're going to run a task. Let's create the task first and then we'll put the run in there. So we'll call this game loop task, and this is going to run during the... So let's just put our announce in here. We'll eventually get away from this and do something useful. But instead of announcing it there, let's run game loop task. So yeah, you know, like how I like to break out things into tasks instead of just doing it all in here. I'll have a task that does it. That way I can debug one thing at a time, and there's a lot of advantages to it. So this should do the same thing. And we have a wait at the end too, so it's going to be happening slower. There we go. And the wait's inside of the... there's one thing. There's a reason I have the wait here. We're also going to go over another command. Because we need to wait because we're going to do per period. So we're going to do it more than once per second. As I said, we're doing it 4 times per second. And right now the loop's running secondly, so every second we want to do something multiple times. And the way to do that is to repeat. So a repeat, if you aren't tired of me going back to the documentation, but I highly recommend that you do to learn this, we're going to use the repeat command. And you can see it repeats a certain amount, a number. So this will repeat it 5 times. By putting the wait in there, it slows it down. If I had the repeat in there per second, so 5 times per second, repeat 5. This is like saying repeat 5. I'm just instantiating my 5 up here right in the beginning as a variable, as a definition. Repeat 5 times whatever we're going to do, and then you wait so it slows it down. Because it's going to repeat 5 times per second, but then we're going to wait with 1 divided by 5 times per second. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little math kind of thing going on, and I learned it by looking at other scripts and other people, talking to other people. But it's a good way to get this to run at the timing that we want. And we are running the game loop, repeating per period per second. Here we go. Let's put it per second. There we go. And now you can see we get a much faster tick time. So now we have, there's every 4 times a second, or 5 times a second, we're running this thing. So every 4 ticks. So let's take that off and start running our script. So what we need to do is we're going to make a way for the mana and the stamina to go down. The mana will go down by you casting a spell. That's probably the most common way. The stamina will go down when you sprint or jump or have too much armor on. Those kind of things. And we have to be careful with that because we want to make sure that the player doesn't get stuck all the time. But we want to keep it fun, right? But we want to make it slightly realistic in here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is make a task to raise these skills. But we have to create the skills first. We have to create these stats, the stamina stat and the mana stat. And I'm going to do that in the same way that I did the attributes as we did in the other lesson. Alright, if you remember back in attributes, we created a data task. And you don't have to do this, but it's a good, nice way to just kind of have a glance at your information that you're working with. And then if you need to change it, you can change it in here, and you don't necessarily have to update it throughout your whole system. If you have it in many different scripts, it can just all kind of call this one data script. So let's make a data script, and let's see, what should we call it? We'll just call it initial stats task. Initial stats data. We'll call it not task, a data, and we'll a type data, and we create a first key there. We'll call it stat, and then we'll have mana, and we'll have. So the mana is the current mana. We need a max mana as well, so we know where to stop it. And it's gonna. These are just the initializing values. We're gonna start small, and it will grow as the player develops itself. So stamina is going to be 1, and then max stamina. Other things I can think of too, there's going to be a lot of things in here. We can also create a regeneration rate. So well, let's finish this off, sorry. So that's going to be the amount that they gain back each time, although that's going to hopefully increase too as they get better, but this again is a starting value. So that's going to be stamina regeneration rate. And we want it pretty small because it's going to run, as you can see, it was running really fast. So we need it to be a small number. I don't know what it is. It's going to be based off of some testing. And mana regeneration rate. And we'll put these all into flags once it makes them. It'll make them from this set of data, and then it'll put them into flags, and that's how it'll be read. And we'll make one for health too. We already have health working, but this way it'll know what to set at in the beginning. And well, of course, we had our attribute points too that we're talking about where to put them. I'll give them 32 to start. But now I'm looking at this, and I feel like these need to be categorized better. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call these the core stats, and then I'm going to call these the points stats, because it's going to be stat.core.mana, and this will be stat.points.attribute point points. And that way it'll start organizing it better. We are going to put a lot of different items in here, I think, as we come up with them, because we want to give the player everything they need when they log in, and until we write the whole design doc out, we don't know what that is. These are some of the ones that I already know that they are. I know I'm going to have a bonus category for item bonuses and things like that as well, but I'll add that in when we do that part. All right, so that's going to be some starting values. And then I think what we're going to do in this game loop task, we're going to create this is the task runner task. I'm going to make other tasks like I'm going to make a mana task, and I'm going to make, of course, a stamina task. And then we can create any kind of task that we need to run inside the game loop when we do make it. Mana task, type task, script. And sometimes I just define something in it just so we have it. So it's not a breaking, it won't break, right, if we run it for some reason. Stamina task, type task, script, and define stamina. All right, we'll fill these out with more information. And then in our game loop task, we're going to run the mana task and run the stamina task. So like I said, this is the task runner task, but when we break these out, it allows me to comment this out if I need to stop it. If stuff is blowing up, if the mana task is blowing up, I can just comment that out and reload, and it'll stop it from running. But the other things can run if they're working. So at least part of my game's working. And instead of commenting this whole game loop out, or trying to find the piece of code in the game loop that needs to be commented out or debugged, I can just do it this way. And I can kind of see all the stuff that's running, like all my tasks that need to be ran. I can just see them all right in here. So it's a little convoluted to break them out like that, but as you know, I like to keep that organized in that kind of way. So all of these will work. Now, they're not doing very much like they seldom do in the beginning, but we will make it do something. So for For mana, let's work on mana because that is kind of an easier one to do. We're going to have a setter task to set all the initial values when they first log in, and we'll work on that next because that's not as interesting as this. But the way that this task is going to run, the only time it's going to run that we know of is when the mana is reduced. So we start out by saying if mana. Now we have to set the mana first, of course. So the player is going to have their mana stored in a flag, but we can define mana. Let's define it as the player.flag mana skill. So let's see, what could that be? Player.flag, and we'll follow the same stat.core.mana.level. We'll follow the same system we've been working on. So that's the flag that the player will have set, that will read their current mana, which will be fluctuating. That will be going up and down depending on how depleted they are. We also need the max mana, and that is the defined value that, for all practical purposes, is based on their intelligence. That's how it will be start out, of course. But there will be buffs and debuffs and all kinds of other things that can give it bonuses or take it away. But this is the max. They're like inherent max mana based on their intelligence. So we can set that here, and that is going to be player.flag, and it's going to be their intelligence. We'll refactor this later. I think there's a better way to do it, but for now we know it's attribute.intelligence.level based on what we have set up in the previous lessons. So that's going to give a definition for the attribute intelligence level. So that'll set their max mana. So now we can say if mana, using the definition, calling it here, is less than max mana, max short for maximum, of course, then we're going to run the regeneration script, and that's of course running all inside of our game loop 4 times a second, 5 times a second. All right, so this is some complicated stuff, so I apologize for my stuttering, but I'm trying to think of the best way to do this, as even though I've written this all already, I'm trying to think of the best way to do it as I go. And so basically what we need to do then is raise mana. And we can skeleton code it like this if we need to. We need something in here. This will blow up right now. An if statement needs something in here to be able to run. So that's why I sometimes create just definitions, because then that at least has something in there. And a definition doesn't do anything except creates a placeholder in memory. But it doesn't run anything. So right now this is a pretty safe script, except that this part will blow up. So what we're going to do then is we're going to increase the mana. We're going to raise it by the regeneration rate. What is the regeneration rate? Let's set that up here too. Define mana regeneration rate, and that's going to be this. And I don't know if that changes at all. If it does, we'll come back and write code to do that. That is to say, this is pretty constant. There are probably going to be, maybe you'll drink a potion that'll increase your mana regeneration rate or something like that. But we'll deal with that when we get there. So we're going to do the same thing that we had done in the other lesson with the script's initial stats data. So we're going into the script that we created down there, and we're going to look at the data key stat dot core dot mana regeneration rate. So I could hard code this value right in here if I wanted to, but instead I'm putting it in a set of data information so that I can just edit it here. That way, if we're using it many times across our whole game system, we only have to change it once here, and it should, if we call it in this type of way, it should update it across the system. So it's a little better for maintenance and clarity. It seems a little convoluted, but at least it'll help you understand how these can pass values around the system. All right, so now, so when that happens, we are going to flag the player and their mana. So their mana is going to be what do we call it? The stat.core.mana level, and we're going to add the mana regeneration rate, our definition. All right, so and that is one of those data actions I was talking about. If we go to the documentation for flag, we're in commands, we'll look at flag. That is, well, it's not in here, but it's in data actions. The other thing we had looked at one point. Here we go. So I went under language explanations. It's probably good just to read this whole document. I know it's hard to read it though if you don't really understand what you're reading, so it's kind of like chicken and egg thing. Probably if you've been following along with all the lessons for so far with me, you have enough knowledge to read this whole thing and it will make some sense. But we're using this one right here to add a value to it. Maybe it's in here. I probably just missed it. Oh, it's this one right here. Okay, I did miss it. So it's good to kind of like know this as well, though. This allows you to run actions on data in your definitions and things like that. But here's how you make a flag go back up. So as the mana is being depleted, it's raising. Only if it's underneath the max mana amount. So if you have a mana of 10 and you cast a spell and it goes down to 5, it's going to tick up back up to 10, and then it's going to stop when it gets back to 10 because this will be false, right? This is true if it goes underneath max mana, but it'll become false when it reaches it, and then it'll stop. In theory, we'll test it all out. But the player doesn't have mana yet. They have intelligence. But I'm breaking out mana separately because I don't really want to mess with I don't want to mess with intelligence. Though it affects mana, mana is its own thing. So I want to make mana separate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create our setter, our initial. So I talked about we're going to go back and set the initial values for the player when they log in. And the way we will do that is with, of course, a good old task. You'll get used to these tasks. This is set initial stats task, type task, and a script. Now, we'll figure out when to run this after we do it, but we'll do a for each loop like we have been doing, and we'll use a script that we're going to loop over for each, and it's going to be the initial stats data, and we're going to look for a data key. So we've done this already several times, and it won't be the last. But stats, so we're going to loop over all of these stats, the stat, as, and you can call it stat. You can call it whatever you want, but I'll call it stat. However, I always like to put safety checks in to make sure the data is not going to be handled wrong. And I probably could put more than I even am. But what I mean by that is I don't want to give the player a flag unless they don't have it already, or if it's 0 or something like that. Probably not 0, because if they got debuffed down to 0, you're not going to want to do this. However, this is only going to run when the player first logs in for the first time. So um, let us show what that is. So if player has flag, and the flag will be the stat dot. Well, first let's narrate this out. I always like to narrate these out so I know what I'm getting into, what kind of information I'm getting. We'll comment that. So we're narrating out what this is looping over. So it should loop over these two items and give us those objects. Reload, and then we're going to do our x run set initial stats task. And there we go. We get our mana. And so we should have core. Okay, it's running through each stat. So we're getting core, and we're getting points. And I need to check if the player has stat dot, and then we'll just do key. So key is going to end up being, it's going to be core in one time, and it's going to be points in another. And actually, we're not going to check it here yet. What we're going to do is here we get a chance to do a nested loop, because we want to go through this one, and then we want to go through all of its children here. So we're going to let's see, we'll define the initial stat, because we're going to loop through all of them. We'll call it this stat, and then we're going to for each through all of those. All right. Another for each. Let's comment this out just so we don't get confused. For each, and then we're going to go through all of those children stats. So this is again complex stuff. We're going to loop through the stat, and we're going to get core, and that's going to be held here. So this is going to be core the first time around, and then we're going to loop through all of those as I don't know, substat. We'll call it. It's a subkey, and we need our colon, and then we could just narrate out this for now so we can see what it is. I like to work incrementally to make sure everything's working. So then it's going to run through, and the first time it's going to run through core, and then it's going to run through all of these, and the second time it's going to run through points, and it's going to run through all of these. And you should be able to see what that does with a test here. No, it didn't work. That's okay though, because we're defining the stat as, well, we don't need to do that. Here, I did this wrong. This stat there. So what I'm doing, I'm defining this stat as, the first time is the stat. Okay. So the first time I'm defining it as core, the second time I'm defining it as points, and then this is the definition name. This is the value it's passing in. So the first time it's passing core, and the second time it's passing points. So let's try that. All right, and it's giving us the values of them. And so you can see it goes through and it gives us all these at first, and then it gives you this. We could narrate, also to make it a little more clear, we could narrate this stat. And then you can also do some formatting in here if you wanted to like indent this if you wanted to make it look clear when you're doing a lot of different data management, like this data manipulation. It's going to get confusing if you're narrating it out to the screen. So you could do something like this, and then it gives you the, well, we're going to do key actually here, because that's just a little, again, too much information. That can be useful to see all that sometimes, but sometimes it's more useful to just see that. And for each the stat, I just don't know why. I was trying to see why it's not, oh, it changed on me. Sometimes it does that. It's trying to help you, and it's not that helpful. All right, so you can see that now it kind of says, okay, these are the things that belong to core, these are the things that belong to points, to help you out if you're debugging and seeing what's happening. All right, but we of course don't really need this. We need it to loop through, but we don't need it outputted. Um, we need these values, but we're going to flag the player all of these when we do it in here. To see maybe what those are, we're going to just show this. So now you can see that they are the actual names. So we'll use both of those. We'll use the substat as well as the key. So maybe to clarify that, we can write this out like this. So first we're going to do the key, and then we're going to do the stat. And then you can see what they're going to be flagged as. Reload. Um, let's do this correctly here. Substat, we called that. There we go. So it kind of looks like how it's going to set it. It's going to flag them, the player their mana, and it's going to be 10. It's going to flag the player the max mana, it's going to be 10, and stamina, etc. All right, so a nested for each loop. That can be quite confusing. I think you have to know the data you're working with. That helps. I'm working with a confined amount of data set. It's just really 2 items, or a few items. If I was working with data that I didn't know that was coming in, it could be in thousands of items, and it could be messy. But this way, if I get this working right and sanitized correctly, or working well, then I can just add as many of these as I want to, and it should be able to handle all of them. Um, so that's how you do a nested one. You can see that you have to indent for each part, but if you keep track of where things are, like this belongs to this, and this can read that, it's reading it right there. And then that can run its own loop. And so this loop has to run, if you imagine, this loop has to finish running before this one can go on to its second item. So this one's going to run the first item, core, and then it's going to run this on core. Before it even runs core, I mean this key here. And then it's going to run points, and then it's going to run this for each on points. And if you kept nesting them, it's going to not run the outer loop until it finishes the loops inside of it. It makes sense to me because I kind of have been beating my head against the wall learning this for a while. But if you don't, just let me know, and maybe we can come up with some more examples and work on it. I think the best way to learn this stuff is just to do it over and over and over and write out your own examples as to what you're trying to do. And I think working with these data script containers is a good way to work because it really gets you used to data manipulation. All right, so now we kind of have a skeleton to work on this. But we are going to actually flag the player with that, but only if they don't have it. Like I said, this is going to only be run if they first log in, but we want to just, it's not a bad idea to just check that it's not there before we set it. It's a common thing to do, so it's an extra line of code, but that's okay. So we're going to call the flag. We already kind of started to define how we're going to lay it out. It's pretty much the same way that it's here, stat.core.mana.level. So it has its own little tree that is going down. So now we have stat.key. Now I don't know if key is, first we have to do this stat because that's going to be core. And the reason I know that is because that's what I just outputted here. This was, well, in my last one up here, if we can still get to it. Yeah, I know that this was this stat. That's what I outputted last time. And this is just stat. This is just text hard coded in because we're going to go right to the stat. That's in here. And we're already looping through that, so we just put that in there. Dot, and now it's going to say core in the first time around. And then it's going to go through, and then because that's pulling it from here, and that's this core the first time around. And now in the second loop, the key is going to be the key from this, and we already printed that out down here, so we know that that's going to be mana in the first time around in core. And then we need dot level. That's just our way to end our flags, so we know it's the level in case we needed to make another one that was called something different. And I could can explain that later. Just trust me that I think this is the best way. Level is just indicating this is the level they're at. You could leave that out, if you wanted to, as long as you leave it out every time you're doing it. You'd have to take it out there too. But I like to do that, so I'll put it in there. All right, so if player has that flag, and we're going to use .not. You know how I like to do that. But if you get confused doing that, don't worry about it. Leave it off and do it normal, and just write an if statement or an else statement if you need to. But this is saying if they don't have this flag. All right. If they don't have this flag, we're going to give them that flag. But I know how that can be confusing. We're trying to come up with a true statement to run this code, right? So we're saying if they don't have this flag, which is true, it's true that they don't have that flag, then let's give it to them. All right, let's give them that flag. Flag player, and we're going to flag them the same thing. We already have it here. We already figured this out. Let's just put it right in there. And what are we going to flag them? The starting value. So that is what we have defined on here. Again, like a lot of things, you could hard code that in here. If you somehow saw that to be a better way to do it, I think this is a better way. And so that'll be with our script. Same thing as above. Initial, same thing we're looping over. Initial. Well, actually, I'm sorry. We can get it. We can get it right in here. What am I talking about? That's what we were. This end value is going to be this stat. I mean, it's going to be the substat. Just like that's why we printed that out before here with our last, well, right here, I guess, the 32, the 10. Those are substat values. That's why we printed them out. It can get really confusing. See, I'm getting confused, so I can understand how it would be. But once you get it set, that's the nice thing is you're setting up scaffolding so that, or this process that it can handle all this data. And once you get it right, it just does all of it at once, and you don't have to tweak it after that unless you change something. So anyway, we're going to flag the player, the stat, and core mana dot level to the initial mana value. I think that's all we need, and it should give me that value. Let's see. First, like this, I showed you this testing format before. Let's just see what our value is right now. I may have it again because I've been testing these things, but stat dot core dot mana dot level, and we ended. So this is we have to narrate it. Sorry, narrate this out in the game, and see I don't have it, so it should give it to me. If I spelled this wrong, it's not going to work, but I believe I spelled it right, and so if I run this, it should give me all the stats. Now we talked about let's run it somewhere else, and where are we going to run it? Well, we're going to run it when the player first logs in, and there's an event for that. Let's look at events. I believe it could be joins. I get these confused when player joins, and you have to look at the description when the player joins the server. So it's not first joins. I think there is one when they first join. Let's look. Here we go. Logs in for the first time. This is the one we want to use. So you can see here they have some distinction. Should not be confused with the player joins, and that's what I almost did. So you could do something when player joins. That could be another thing we do later. But on this one, it's on player player logs in for the first time. Let me see if I can get that right here. So this is another event. So we can put another event in here. On player logs in for first time. Good, there it is. And the help text was coming up, so I hit tab and I saw it. And when they do, we will run this task. Run that. So again, that's kind of the advantage of breaking out these tasks, is you can work on the task in this set block of code, and then you can just run it in here. That way, I probably, well, with this event, I may not have a lot of things running, but with some of the events, you're going to have a lot of things happening, and this kind of works it out, and it makes it in sentence format. If you write these in a way that you can read them logically, grammatically, then you kind of know what's going on, and you can say, okay, this is all the stuff that's happening when the player logs in for the first time, or whatever event you're looking at, and it keeps it a little cleaner, I think, in my opinion. There might be advantages to the other way, and I'd be welcome to hear those. And I always can have my mind changed. I'm learning all the time, so that's a discussion that I would like to have. But anyway, this should run it. Now I've logged into the server. I'm already here, so it's not going to run for me. You could do an announce in here if you wanted to. Welcome player.name to Deluvia. This is the name of my world, Deluvia. One thing I'm working on too as a side topic, which I love to have side topics, even though it makes these videos longer. The idea of immersion, and unfortunately, we have to still have like hard numbers showing. Like your mana's 10. I think if I could do it, I'd pull it off where they really didn't know the number, just to create that immersion. Like for example, your IQ. It's a weird thing in real life. You have a number, but that doesn't really say how smart you are. It's kind of based on a lot of different things. Maybe you won Jeopardy. That would be a thing. But the same idea with welcome to the game. Once you're in the game, you don't want to know it's a game. Maybe you want to be immersed into this fantasy world. So anyway, that's what I try to do when I can. So rather welcome them to the game, welcome them to Deluvia. Down a rabbit path there. Sorry about that. So we could do that, and then we could do that, and we could make a task for that. Separate that up. But I think that's a little ridiculous here, Sir Bandersnatch, to do that. So I'm pretty sure that's going to run when a player logs in. This announce will help me see that it is. And I could make some information. I could have it write a file out to let me know things that are happening, so I could check logs later on. But that's a little bit more advanced than what we want to do right now. Not that this isn't advanced at now. Okay, so I did behind the scenes. Let's x narrate player.flag stat.core.mana.level. And let's see if I have it. Nope, I typed it in wrong. Here we go. Let's see, I have it. 10. All right, good. So now my mana is set at 10. So if the player logged in for the first time, like we had set up here, it's going to set all of those attributes. All of those stats, that is. And we'll make more of these down the road. But now they have a flag called mana. So now when our mana task runs, oh, I just noticed I switched these. Mana tasks runs. It will run this, and it'll be okay because they actually have that flag. The other thing I have been meaning to want to show you this, but the thing you can do is you can have fallbacks. This is how fallback is. So what this says, right at the end of the flag, right at the end of the tag, I have pipe and then a 0. The 0 is just whatever I want the fallback to be. In this case, 0. So this is saying it's going to flag the player this level, and if it somehow this doesn't work, if this fails, it falls back to 0. The problem with doing fallbacks is it doesn't allow you to sometimes see the error. It'll suppress it because it's going to fall back to that, and you won't notice the error happening. So we want to limit when and where we use these. At least we want to debug these out fully before we add any fallbacks. Fallbacks in general are a good idea. I think, and we will be using them, but I want to make this code hardened enough that it won't need them as much, and then I'll put them in. Okay, so I just at least touched on that, and we'll use more of those as time goes on. So we have a way. The manas. We're currently my mana's at 10, and my max mana. So it's at all of these. So they're all my max mana is at 10. When I raise my intelligence, it's going to also raise my max mana, and I want to keep my max mana in line with my intelligence. So if you remember how we raised our intelligence through the attributes interface, the menu, I also want to increase the max mana. So we want to keep it in sync with the intelligence. So we're going to kind of reorder this in a little different way.
All right, that's enough for this lesson, I think. And in the next one, we will refactor the code to be ready to use our getter procedure script containers, which will be a new one that we can learn, and we can see how we can get the value of our intelligence so that we know what it is and it won't interfere with the mana.